The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Westminster as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, adjusted her navy blue coat one final time. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the October chill, but from the weight of what she was about to do. Today would mark the beginning of the end of everything she had known for the past 13 years. Prince William stood beside her, his jaw set in that familiar way that meant he was fighting to maintain his composure. The press had gathered in unprecedented numbers, their cameras creating a wall of black lenses that seemed to watch their every breath. Neither of them had slept the night before. How could they, knowing that today they would have to stand before the world and pretend that everything was normal when their private world had been crumbling for months? Catherine's mind drifted back to the conversation they had shared just hours earlier in the privacy of their Kensington Palace apartment. The children were still sleeping, blissfully unaware that their parents' marriage was hanging by the thinnest of threads. Prince George's school bag sat by the door, ready for another ordinary Tuesday, while Princess Charlotte's ballet shoes lay scattered where she had left them after practice. Prince Louis had fallen asleep clutching his favorite toy airplane, dreaming perhaps of adventures he might have when he grew up. "We have to tell them soon," Catherine had whispered to William as they sat in their kitchen, 2 cups of untouched tea growing cold between them. The space that had once felt warm and intimate now seemed cavernous, filled with all the words they had stopped saying to each other. William had run his hands through his hair, a gesture she had seen countless times during their courtship at St. Andrew's University. Back then, it had been endearing, a sign of his nervousness before exams or his excitement about their future together. Now it simply looked like exhaustion. "I know," he had replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But not today. Today we just have to get through this engagement." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. They were about to attend the opening of a new children's hospital wing, an event focused on healing and hope, while their own relationship lay wounded and seemingly beyond repair. Catherine had chosen her outfit carefully, knowing that every detail would be scrutinized and analyzed. The navy coat had been a wedding gift from William's grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, who had passed away just over a year ago. Wearing it felt like carrying a piece of the late Queen's strength with her. As they prepared to step out of their car and face the crowd, Catherine felt the familiar weight of William's hand in hers. It was a gesture they had performed thousands of times over the years, a simple act that had become as natural as breathing. His hand had been there when she had walked down the aisle at Westminster Abbey, when she had given birth to each of their children, during moments of joy and sorrow that had defined their shared life. But something was different today. The warmth that had always passed between them through that simple touch felt distant, mechanical. They were holding hands because it was expected, because the cameras were watching, because the future King and Queen of England were supposed to present a united front to the world. The spontaneous affection that had once made the gesture meaningful had been replaced by duty and performance. The hospital director, Dr. Margaret Stevens, approached them with a bright smile, clearly honored to be welcoming such distinguished guests. She had no idea that she was greeting a couple who had barely spoken to each other during the car ride over, who had sat in separate corners of the vehicle, like polite strangers rather than partners who had once been inseparable. "Your Royal Highnesses, welcome to St. Mary's Children's Hospital," Dr. Stevens said, her voice carrying the kind of enthusiasm that suggested she had practiced this greeting many times. "We are absolutely thrilled that you could join us for this momentous occasion." Catherine smiled, the expression coming automatically after years of royal training. "Thank you for having us, Dr. Stevens. We're delighted to be here." The words rolled off her tongue with practiced ease, even as her heart felt heavy in her chest. She had become an expert at saying the right things, at projecting warmth and interest even when her personal world was falling apart. As they began their tour of the facility, walking through corridors painted in cheerful colors and decorated with children's artwork, Catherine found herself genuinely moved by what she saw. Young patients, some barely older than Louis, smiled bravely from their hospital beds. Parents sat beside them, holding vigil with the kind of devotion that spoke to the deepest bonds of family love. In the pediatric cancer ward, they met 7-year-old Emma, who had been battling leukemia for 8 months. Despite her illness, Emma's eyes sparkled with curiosity and life. She had prepared a drawing for Catherine, a colorful picture of a princess in a blue dress surrounded by butterflies. "I made this for you," Emma said shyly, holding out the paper with hands that looked too small and fragile. "My mummy said you like butterflies." Catherine knelt down to Emma's level, accepting the drawing with genuine gratitude. "It's absolutely beautiful, Emma. Thank you so much. I can see you're a very talented artist. As she spoke, Catherine felt tears threatening to form in her eyes, not just because of Emma's courage, but because of the stark contrast between this child's innocence and the complicated adult world she and William inhabited. William watched the interaction, and, for a moment, Catherine saw something flicker in his expression. It was the same look he had given her years ago when they had visited their first children's hospital together as newlyweds, when he had fallen in love all over again, watching her natural way with young people. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the careful neutrality that had become his default expression around her. They continued through the hospital, meeting more children and families, touring the new surgical suites and therapy rooms. Catherine threw herself into the engagement with characteristic dedication, asking thoughtful questions and taking genuine interest in the medical equipment and treatment protocols. It was easier to focus on other people's challenges than to think about her own. During a break in the tour, while William was speaking with the hospital's board members, Catherine found herself alone for a few minutes in a small family room. She sat down heavily in one of the comfortable chairs provided for parents who spent long nights at their children's bedsides. The room was designed to offer comfort and peace, with soft lighting and calming colors, but Catherine felt anything but peaceful. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the messages that had accumulated during the morning. There were the usual communications from her private secretary about upcoming engagements, updates from the children's protection officers about security arrangements, and a text from her mother asking how the hospital visit was going. But there was nothing from William, even though he was just rooms away. They had once texted each other constantly throughout the day, sharing funny observations or sweet messages. Now they communicated primarily through their staff. The silence between them had grown gradually, so slowly that Catherine couldn't pinpoint exactly when it had started. Maybe it began during the stress of Queen Elizabeth's final illness and death, when the weight of additional responsibilities had fallen on their shoulders. Maybe it started earlier, during the pandemic lockdowns when they were forced to spend months isolated together while trying to homeschool 3 young children and fulfill their royal duties from home. Or perhaps it had been building even longer, since Prince Philip's death, since Harry and Meghan's departure from royal life, since the constant pressure of public scrutiny had slowly worn away at the foundation of their relationship. What Catherine knew for certain was that somewhere along the way, they had stopped being partners and had become colleagues. They coordinated schedules and shared responsibilities for their children, but the intimacy that had sustained them through the early challenges of royal life had disappeared. They slept in the same bed, but felt miles apart, went through the motions of being a married couple while feeling like actors playing roles they had grown tired of performing. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Your Royal Highness?" It was Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell, Catherine's personal protection officer. "Dr. Stevens is ready to continue the tour when you are." Catherine stood up, smoothed down her coat, and checked her appearance in the small mirror on the wall. Her makeup was still perfect, her hair still in place, her expression composed and pleasant. No one looking at her would guess that she was contemplating the end of her marriage to the future King of England. When she rejoined William and the hospital staff, he glanced at her with what might have been concern. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly, the first words he had directed specifically to her all morning. "Of course," she replied, matching his tone. "Just needed a moment." They completed their tour, visited the new children's library, and attended the official ribbon-cutting ceremony. Catherine made a brief speech praising the hospital's dedication to young patients and their families, speaking about the importance of providing not just medical care, but hope and comfort to children during their most vulnerable moments. Her words were heartfelt and well-received, though she couldn't help but think about the irony of talking about healing while her own life felt broken. As they prepared to leave the hospital, the inevitable moment arrived. They would walk together down the main corridor, past the gathered press and well-wishers, hand in hand as they had done countless times before. It should have been automatic, this simple gesture of unity and affection. But, as they approached the exit, Catherine felt a sudden, overwhelming sense that she couldn't pretend anymore. The weight of maintaining the facade, of smiling and waving and acting like everything was perfect when nothing felt right, suddenly felt unbearable. She looked down at William's outstretched hand, the same hand that had slipped a wedding ring onto her finger 11 years ago, the same hand that had held hers through 3 pregnancies and childbirths, through the loss of his grandfather and grandmother, through moments of triumph and disappointment that had shaped their adult lives. But today, that hand felt like a prop in a performance she no longer wanted to give. Without thinking, without planning, without considering the consequences, Catherine let her hand fall to her side. She didn't make a dramatic gesture or say anything to draw attention to the moment. She simply stopped pretending that everything was normal and walked forward without reaching for the comfort and connection that William's hand had always represented. The movement was small, barely noticeable to most observers, but to William, it felt like an earthquake. He had been extending his hand automatically, expecting the familiar weight of hers settling into his palm, when suddenly, there was nothing but empty space. For a fraction of a second, he stood frozen, his hand still outstretched, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. In that instant, years of careful royal training warred with pure human instinct. Every lesson about maintaining composure under pressure, every reminder about the importance of projecting stability and unity, told him to simply lower his hand and continue walking as if nothing had happened. But something deeper, something that had nothing to do with royal protocol and everything to do with the fact that this was Catherine, the woman he had loved since they were both young and uncertain about their futures, made him react without thinking. "Kate," he said, using the name that had been his private one for her long before the world knew her as Catherine. His voice was quiet but urgent, and he took a half-step toward her, his hand instinctively reaching out again. The use of her old nickname, spoken with an emotion that had been absent from their interactions for months, stopped Catherine in her tracks. She turned to look at him, and, for a moment, the careful masks they had both been wearing slipped away. He looked hurt and confused and desperately concerned, like the young man she had fallen in love with rather than the future king he had become. "What's wrong?" he asked, lowering his voice even further so that only she could hear. Around them, the hospital staff and security detail continued their preparations for departure, giving the royal couple a moment of relative privacy in the midst of their very public lives. Catherine looked into his eyes, those same blue eyes that had made her heart skip beats during their university days, and felt a wave of sadness wash over her. How could she explain that everything was wrong? That somewhere along the way they had lost each other in the maze of duty and responsibility and public expectation? That she felt more alone standing next to him than she did when she was actually by herself? She started, then stopped, unable to find words that would make sense of the tangle of emotions she was feeling. How could she tell him that his hand no longer felt like home? That their marriage had become a performance she was tired of giving? That she loved him, but wasn't sure she was still in love with him? The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of unspoken disappointments and growing distance. Around them, life continued. Doctors and nurses went about their duties, children played in the family areas, parents held vigil by bedsides. But, for Catherine and William, time seemed suspended in this moment of recognition that something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. Finally, Catherine took a breath and looked directly at her husband, the father of her children, the man who would one day be king and who expected her to be his queen. "We need to talk," she said simply. "Really talk. Not about schedules or the children or royal duties. About us." William nodded, understanding immediately what she meant. They had been avoiding this conversation for months, maybe even years, filling their time with obligations and activities that left no room for honest reflection about the state of their marriage. But Catherine's simple act of letting go of his hand had forced the issue into the open in a way that could no longer be ignored. "Tonight," he agreed, "after the children are asleep." They stood there for another moment, two people who had once been inseparable now feeling like strangers, before Catherine nodded, and they resumed their walk toward the exit. This time, they walked side by side but not touching, their body language speaking volumes about the distance that had grown between them. As they emerged into the bright afternoon sunlight, the waiting crowd burst into applause and cheers. Cameras flashed, and reporters called out questions about the hospital visit and their upcoming engagements. Catherine and William smiled and waved, playing their parts perfectly, but everything had changed in those few seconds inside the hospital corridor. That evening, as promised, they would begin the most important conversation of their marriage, one that would determine not just their personal future, but the future of the monarchy itself. But, for now, they simply got into their car and drove home to their children, two people who loved each other but were no longer sure that love was enough to bridge the gap that had grown between them. The royal protection officers, trained to notice everything, had observed the moment when Catherine let go of William's hand. They said nothing, of course. Their job was to protect, not to comment. But they understood that they had witnessed something significant. In their reports that evening, they would note that the hospital visit had proceeded without incident, but privately they wondered what the subtle shift in the royal couple's dynamic might mean for the future. As their car pulled through the gates of Kensington Palace, Catherine looked out at the familiar surroundings that had been her home for years. Soon, she and William would have to decide whether it would continue to be their shared home or whether their paths, which had intertwined so completely since their university days, were finally diverging towards separate futures. The grandfather clock in the drawing room of Kensington Palace chimed 11 times, each note echoing through the silence that had settled over the apartment. Catherine sat curled in the corner of the cream-colored sofa, still wearing the comfortable clothes she had changed into after dinner with the children. William paced slowly by the tall windows, occasionally glancing out at the security lights that illuminated the palace gardens. They had been sitting in this weighted quiet for nearly an hour, both knowing they needed to talk but struggling to find a place to begin. The children's bedtime routine had provided a welcome distraction earlier. Prince George had wanted help with his mathematics homework, a challenging problem about fractions that had required both parents working together to explain. For those 20 minutes, bent over his school books at the kitchen table, they had felt almost like a normal family again. Princess Charlotte had performed an elaborate ballet routine she had learned that week, spinning and leaping around her bedroom while Catherine and William applauded from the doorway. Prince Louis had demanded 3 bedtime stories and had fallen asleep holding both their hands, his small fingers wrapped around theirs with the unconscious trust that only young children possess. It was always like this. Their roles as parents brought out the best in both of them, creating moments of natural harmony that made the problems in their marriage seem temporarily distant. But now, with all 3 children safely asleep and the palace settling into its nighttime quiet, there was nowhere left to hide from the conversation they both knew was overdue. Catherine broke the silence first. "Do you remember our first fight?" she asked, her voice soft but clear in the stillness of the room. "Really fight, I mean. Not just a disagreement about where to have dinner or what movie to watch." William stopped pacing and turned to look at her. "You mean when I went to that polo match with the girls from my regiment, instead of coming to your friend's wedding?" "That's the one." Catherine smiled slightly, but it was tinged with sadness. "You were so angry that I was angry. You couldn't understand why it mattered to me that you had made other plans when I had asked you weeks in advance to come with me. And you were furious that I didn't see the problem with changing plans at the last minute." William moved away from the window and sat down in the armchair across from her, far enough away that they weren't touching but close enough to see every expression that crossed her face. "We didn't speak for 3 days. But then, you showed up at my flat with those awful flowers you bought from the petrol station, and that ridiculous speech about how you were still learning how to be a proper boyfriend." The memory made Catherine's expression soften for a moment. "You said that caring about someone meant caring about the things that mattered to them, even if you didn't understand why they mattered. And you forgave me," William said quietly. "You always forgave me when I got it wrong, even when I made the same mistakes over and over again." The weight of that observation settled between them. Throughout their relationship, Catherine had indeed been remarkably forgiving, patient with William's struggles to balance his royal obligations with their personal relationship, understanding when duty called him away at inconvenient moments, gracious when his family's needs took precedence over their plans. But somewhere along the way, that patience had transformed from love and understanding into resignation and exhaustion. "I did forgive you," Catherine agreed. "But, William, I think I stopped expecting you to actually change. I just adapted to disappointment instead of believing things could get better." The honesty of her words hit William like a physical blow. He had known their relationship had been struggling, but hearing Catherine articulate it so clearly that she had stopped believing in their ability to grow together forced him to confront how far they had drifted apart. "When did that happen?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "When did you stop believing in us?" Catherine considered the question seriously, pulling her knees up to her chest in a gesture that made her look younger and more vulnerable. "I don't think it was one moment. It was more like erosion, like water slowly wearing away stone until you realize the landscape has completely changed." She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "Maybe it started when Harry left. Not just left the country, but left the family. You were so hurt by it, so angry and confused about why he couldn't just accept his role and be happy with it. And I understood that, I really did. But you started pulling away from everything that felt uncertain or challenging, including the parts of our relationship that required work. William flinched at the reference to his brother. Harry's departure from royal life had indeed been devastating for him, not just because of the public scrutiny it brought, but because of the private family fractures it had revealed. That wasn't about you, he said defensively. But it affected me, Catherine replied. It affected us. You started treating our marriage like another duty to manage rather than a relationship to nurture. We began scheduling time together like we schedule public engagements. And when life got complicated, couple time was the first thing to get canceled. The accuracy of her observation stung because William could trace the pattern she was describing. After Harry and Meghan's departure, he had indeed become more rigid about his responsibilities, more focused on proving that he could be the reliable son, the dutiful heir. In doing so, he had started taking Catherine's support for granted, assuming that her love was unconditional and would always be there regardless of how much attention he paid to nurturing it. You're right, he admitted, the words coming out roughly. I did stop trying. But, Kate, I was overwhelmed. Losing grandfather, then Granny, Harry leaving, Papa becoming king, suddenly, knowing that the crown is only one step away instead of some distant future responsibility. I felt like I was drowning, and instead of reaching out to you for help, I just tried to keep my head above water on my own. But that's exactly the problem, Catherine said, her voice gaining strength as she articulated feelings she had been carrying for years. Marriage is supposed to mean that you don't have to keep your head above water on your own. We're supposed to be a team, helping each other through the difficult times. But you made the choice to handle everything alone, and that left me feeling like an accessory rather than a partner. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of these truths settling around them. Outside, they could hear the distant sound of London traffic, the normal life of a city continuing while their private world underwent seismic shifts. Catherine found herself thinking about all the time she had sat in similar rooms, in similar situations, working through problems and finding solutions. But those had always been about external challenges, how to handle negative press coverage, how to manage their children's education and privacy, how to balance their royal duties with their personal lives. This was the first time they were examining the fundamental structure of their relationship itself. Do you remember what we talked about on our last night at St. Andrews? Catherine asked suddenly. After graduation, before we had to face the real world? William's expression softened at the memory. We sat up all night in your room, talking about whether we could make it work, whether love was enough to overcome all the challenges that came with my situation. And what did we decide? We decided that love wasn't enough on its own, but that love plus commitment plus genuine friendship could overcome anything. William looked directly at her as he spoke. We promised that no matter what happened, we would always be honest with each other and always fight for us rather than against each other. When was the last time we fought for us, William? Catherine asked quietly. Really fought for us, not just tried to maintain the status quo or avoid conflict. The question hung in the air between them, unanswered because they both knew the truth. They had stopped fighting for their relationship and had started simply managing it, like a business partnership focused on efficiency rather than a marriage built on love and mutual support. William stood up abruptly and walked to the fireplace, staring at the family photographs arranged on the mantelpiece. Images of their wedding day, holidays with the children, official portraits marking various milestones in their royal lives. In every picture, they looked happy, united, deeply connected. But he could see now that many of the more recent photographs looked posed, performed rather than natural. I met with a divorce lawyer last week, Catherine said suddenly, the words dropping into the silence like stones into still water. William spun around to face her, his expression shifting from contemplative to shocked. What? Not to start proceedings, Catherine clarified quickly, just to understand what it would mean. For us, for the children, for the monarchy. I needed to know what our options actually were instead of just feeling trapped. The word, trapped, hit William with unexpected force. In all their discussions about duty and responsibility, he had never considered that Catherine might feel imprisoned by their life together. He had always assumed that she, like him, had chosen this path willingly and completely. Do you feel trapped? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Catherine looked at him for a long moment before answering. I feel like I'm living someone else's life. Like I'm playing a role that I auditioned for years ago, but that no longer fits who I've become. And The most exhausting part is pretending that I'm happy with it when I'm really just going through the motions. But our life, it's been good, hasn't it? We have beautiful children, meaningful work, financial security, the ability to make a real difference in people's lives. Yes, all of that is true, Catherine agreed. But, William, you can have all the right ingredients and still not have the right recipe. We have built a successful public partnership, but somewhere along the way we lost our private marriage. She stood up and joined him by the fireplace, standing close enough to touch, but not quite touching. Look at this picture, she said, pointing to a photograph from Charlotte's christening. Look at how we're standing. William studied the image. They were both smiling, both looking elegant and appropriate, but there was something formal about their positioning. They stood near each other, but not quite together, like colleagues posing for a professional photograph rather than a married couple celebrating their daughter's baptism. Now look at this one, Catherine continued, indicating an older photograph from their honeymoon in the Seychelles. In that image, they were completely intertwined, William's arms wrapped around Catherine from behind, both of them laughing at something off camera. Their body language spoke of intimacy, playfulness, genuine joy in each other's company. I see what you mean, William said quietly. We look like different people. We were different people. We were partners then, in every sense of the word. Now we're what? Co-parents? Colleagues? Flatmates who share royal duties. The brutal honesty of her assessment forced William to confront how dramatically their relationship had changed. They shared a bed, but rarely made love with any real passion or connection. They shared meals, but often ate in silence, scrolling through their phones or discussing logistics rather than connecting emotionally. They shared responsibilities, but rarely shared their deepest thoughts, fears, or dreams. What did the lawyer tell you? William asked, though part of him didn't want to know. That divorce would be complicated, but not impossible. That there are precedents for protecting the children's positions in the line of succession. That custody arrangements could be worked out privately. That the monarchy has survived royal divorces before and would survive again. Catherine's voice was matter of fact, but William could hear the pain underneath her practical tone. Is that what you want? Divorce? Catherine was quiet for so long that William began to wonder if she was going to answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. What I want is my husband back. The man I fell in love with. The man who used to call me in the middle of boring meetings just to hear my voice. The man who would dance with me in the kitchen while we waited for the kettle to boil. I want the partnership we used to have, where we talked about everything and supported each other through everything. She turned to face him directly, tears now visible in her eyes. But I don't know if that man still exists, William. And I don't know if I'm still the woman who inspired that kind of love and attention from you. Maybe we've both changed too much. Maybe the people we are now just aren't compatible with each other. William felt something crack open in his chest, a recognition of loss that was sharper than grief because it involved the potential losing of something that was still technically present. Catherine was right there beside him, close enough to touch, but she felt farther away than she ever had. I'm still here, he said desperately. I'm still the same person who loves you. Are you? Catherine asked gently. Or are you the person who loved me 10 years ago and is now trying to maintain that feeling out of habit and duty? The question forced William to examine his own heart with uncomfortable honesty. Did he love Catherine, or did he love the idea of Catherine? Did he miss her specifically, or did he miss being part of a couple? When he thought about their future together, was he motivated by genuine desire to rebuild their connection, or by fear of change and loss? I don't know, he admitted finally. I think I've been so focused on being a good husband in theory that I stopped paying attention to whether I was actually being a good husband to you specifically. It was perhaps the most honest thing either of them had said all evening, and it hung between them with the weight of recognition. They had been married to their roles and their obligations for so long that they had forgotten to be married to each other. So where does that leave us? Catherine asked. William looked around their beautifully appointed drawing room, at the evidence of their shared life, at the photographs documenting years of apparent happiness and success. Then he looked at Catherine, really looked at her, trying to see her as she was now rather than as she had been or as he expected her to be. She looked tired, he realized. Not just physically tired from a long day, but emotionally exhausted in a way that spoke to years of carrying unspoken disappointments. But underneath the weariness, he could still see traces of the woman who had challenged him intellectually at university, who had laughed at his terrible jokes, who had seen past his titles and expectations to love him for who he was underneath all the royal protocol. It leaves us with a choice, he said finally. We can get divorced and try to build separate lives that make us individually happier. Or we can fight for this, really fight for it, and try to rebuild something real between us. And if we try to rebuild and it doesn't work, then at least we'll know we gave it everything we had. We'll know that we honored what we once meant to each other by trying to save it. Catherine considered this, weighing the enormous risks involved in either path. Staying and fighting meant the possibility of more disappointment, more years of gradual erosion if they couldn't actually change the fundamental dynamics between them. But leaving meant definitely ending something that had once been beautiful, giving up on the possibility that they might find their way back to each other. What would fighting for us actually look like, she asked. Not in theory, but practically. What would we need to do differently? William thought about this seriously. We'd need to start prioritizing our relationship the way we prioritize everything else that matters to us. We'd need to have regular, honest conversations about how we're feeling and what we need from each other. We'd probably need help, counseling or therapy or something, because we've forgotten how to be intimate without being sexual, how to be vulnerable without being defensive. We'd need to remember why we fell in love in the first place, Catherine added, and figure out whether those reasons still exist or whether we need to discover new reasons. We'd need to date each other again, William said, the idea forming as he spoke. Not just exist in the same space and share responsibilities, but actually pursue each other romantically. Court each other. For the first time all evening, Catherine smiled genuinely. That sounds terrifying and ridiculous and potentially wonderful. William finished hopefully. And potentially wonderful, she agreed. They stood there in their drawing room, surrounded by the symbols of their established life, contemplating the enormous courage it would take to tear down the walls they had built around their hearts and try to find each other again. It felt almost impossibly daunting, but it also felt like the first real hope either of them had experienced in years. If we're going to try this, Catherine said slowly, we need to promise each other complete honesty. No more protecting each other's feelings by avoiding difficult conversations. No more accepting things that aren't working just to keep the peace. Agreed, William said. And we need to promise that we're doing this for the right reasons, because we want to rebuild our marriage, not because we're afraid of the alternative. They looked at each other across the space that had felt insurmountable just hours earlier, and, for the first time in months, they both felt genuinely present in the same moment. The road ahead would be difficult, uncertain, requiring them to be more vulnerable and brave than they had been in years. But tonight, in the quiet of their drawing room, it felt possible. So, Catherine said, when do we start? William reached out his hand, not in the automatic gesture of royal protocol, but as a genuine invitation to reconnection. How about now? This time, when Catherine took his hand, it felt like a choice rather than an obligation. It felt like the beginning of something new rather than the performance of something old. And, for both of them, it felt like coming home. 3 weeks had passed since that pivotal evening in their drawing room, and Catherine found herself standing in the unfamiliar waiting area of Dr. Elizabeth Thornfield's private practice in Harley Street. The renowned relationship therapist had been recommended by Catherine's personal physician, who had assured her of complete discretion. Even so, Catherine felt exposed and vulnerable sitting in the neutral-toned room with its carefully chosen artwork and soft lighting designed to promote calm and openness. William sat beside her, equally uncomfortable, but trying not to show it. They had both arrived separately, using unmarked cars, and entering through a private entrance to avoid any possibility of being photographed together at a marriage counselor's office. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that they had to sneak around to work on their marriage the same way other couples might sneak around to have an affair. I've never done anything like this before, William admitted quietly, straightening his tie for the third time since they had arrived. Have you? No, Catherine replied, smoothing down her skirt. But I think that might be part of our problem. We've tried to handle everything on our own for so long that we've forgotten how to ask for help. The past 3 weeks had been a strange mix of hope and awkwardness as they attempted to begin the process of rediscovering each other. They had tried to have more meaningful conversations over dinner, but years of superficial communication made deep sharing feel unnatural and forced. They had attempted to spend more quality time together, but found themselves struggling to remember what they actually enjoyed doing as a couple beyond their royal duties. Most challenging of all, they had tried to be more physically affectionate, but Even simple gestures like holding hands or brief kisses felt performative rather than spontaneous. It was as if they needed to relearn the language of intimacy from the beginning, but neither of them was sure where to start. Their first breakthrough had come unexpectedly during a quiet Sunday morning when they were both in the kitchen making breakfast while the children played in the garden. Catherine had been struggling to open a jar of jam when William had stepped behind her to help, his arms encircling her as he added his strength to hers. For just a moment, their bodies had fit together in the old familiar way, and Catherine had felt a flutter of the physical attraction that had once been such a natural part of their relationship. "Remember when we used to cook together all the time at university?" William had said, his breath warm against her ear as he spoke. "You taught me how to make that pasta sauce that I still order sometimes when I'm missing you during long trips." "You were a terrible student," Catherine had replied, but she had leaned back against him rather than stepping away. "You kept getting distracted and burning things. I got distracted because you were beautiful and I couldn't concentrate on anything else when you were near me," William had said, and for a moment the words had sounded like the old William, the one who used to flirt with her so naturally that it made her feel dizzy with possibility. But then, Prince Louis had run into the kitchen with a scraped knee, and the moment had been broken as they shifted back into parent mode. Still, it had given them both a glimpse of what might be possible if they could find a way back to each other. The door to Dr. Thornfield's office opened, and a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a simple bun smiled at them. "Your Royal Highnesses, I'm Elizabeth Thornfield. Thank you for coming today." They followed her into a comfortable office furnished more like someone's living room than a clinical space. There were two armchairs positioned at an angle to each other, with Dr. Thornfield's chair completing a triangle that felt conversational rather than confrontational. "Before we begin," Dr. Thornfield said as they settled into their seats, "I want to assure you both that everything discussed in this room is completely confidential. I have no relationship with the press, the palace, or any external parties. My only concern is helping you work through whatever challenges you're facing in your relationship." Catherine felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. The fear of exposure had been one of her biggest concerns about seeking professional help. "Thank you. That means a great deal to us. Now then," Dr. Thornfield continued, "why don't you start by telling me what brought you here? What made you decide that you needed outside support for your relationship?" Catherine and William exchanged glances, neither sure who should speak first. Finally, Catherine took a breath and began. "We've been growing apart for years, but we only recently acknowledged how serious the problem has become. We love each other, or we think we do, but we've lost the ability to connect as husband and wife rather than just as co-parents and colleagues. Can you tell me about a recent example of this disconnect?" Dr. Thornfield asked gently. William spoke up. 3 weeks ago, we were at a public engagement together. Normally, we would hold hands while walking, but Kate let go of mine. It sounds like such a small thing, but it made us both realize how much we've been performing our marriage rather than living it." Dr. Thornfield nodded thoughtfully. Physical affection becoming routine rather than meaningful is very common in long-term relationships, especially when couples are dealing with external stresses. "Can you tell me about some of those stresses?" For the next 45 minutes, Catherine and William found themselves talking more openly than they had in months. They discussed the pressures of royal life, the challenge of raising children in the public eye, the impact of recent family deaths and departures on their emotional well-being, and the gradual erosion of their intimacy as they focused more on their duties and less on their relationship. Dr. Thornfield listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions or pointing out patterns in their communication. Catherine was surprised to discover how good it felt to speak honestly about their struggles without worrying about protecting William's feelings or maintaining a facade of perfection. "One thing I'm noticing," Dr. Thornfield observed near the end of their session, "is that you both seem to have very clear ideas about your roles and responsibilities, but you're less clear about your needs and desires. Can you each tell me one thing you need from your partner that you're not currently getting?" The question caught them both off guard. They had spent so much time focusing on what they should be doing for each other that they had stopped paying attention to what they actually wanted from each other. Catherine thought for a long moment before answering. "I need to feel chosen," she said finally. "Not just as a wife or a mother or a royal partner, but as Catherine. I need to feel like William sees me as an individual person who he actively wants to be with, not just someone who fills a necessary role in his life." William looked surprised by her answer. "But of course I chose you. I married you. You chose me 11 years ago, Catherine clarified. But choice isn't just something you make once. It's something you make over and over again, every day. I need to feel like you're still choosing me now, as the person I am today, not just maintaining a choice you made when we were different people. Dr. Thornfield turned to William. And what about you? What do you need from Catherine? William was quiet for even longer, clearly struggling to identify and articulate his own needs. I think I need to feel adequate, he said eventually. Not as a future king or a public figure, but as a husband and a father. I need to feel like I'm enough for you, that you're not just settling for me because leaving would be too complicated. The vulnerability in his admission surprised Catherine. She had been so focused on her own feelings of being taken for granted that she hadn't recognized William's insecurity about whether he was truly valued for who he was rather than what he represented. Those are both very important and very valid needs, Dr. Thornfield said. And I think they're more connected than they might initially appear. Catherine, you need to feel actively chosen and valued for who you are. William, you need to feel genuinely appreciated and desired rather than just tolerated. Both of those needs center around authentic recognition and appreciation of your individual selves within your partnership. She leaned forward slightly. For your homework this week, I want you to try something very specific. Every day, I want each of you to do one thing that demonstrates that you see and value your partner as an individual person. It doesn't have to be grand or expensive or time-consuming. It just has to be specific to who they are and what they enjoy. Can you give us some examples? Catherine asked. It might be as simple as bringing home their favorite coffee without being asked, or sending a text message that references something they mention caring about, or suggesting an activity that you know they would enjoy even if it's not your personal preference. The key is that it has to be about them specifically, not about your role as a spouse. As they left Dr. Thornfield's office, Catherine and William walked together toward their waiting cars, both processing what they had heard and shared during the session. That was harder than I expected, William said as they paused at the corner where they would part ways to maintain discretion. But, good hard, Catherine replied. Like physical therapy for a relationship. Over the following days, they both tried to implement Dr. Thornfield's suggestion, with mixed but encouraging results. William surprised Catherine by arranging for her favorite bakery to deliver fresh croissants on a morning when she had mentioned missing the pastries from her gap year in France. Catherine touched William by suggesting they watch a documentary about aviation history, remembering his childhood fascination with planes and helicopters. The gestures were small, but they represented a fundamental shift in attention. Instead of going through the motions of being married, they were actively trying to see and respond to each other as individuals. Their second therapy session focused on communication patterns, and Dr. Thornfield introduced them to techniques for expressing needs and concerns without triggering defensiveness. They practiced using I statements rather than accusations, and learned to pause and reflect before responding when conversations became emotionally charged. One of the biggest challenges for couples in high-pressure situations, Dr. Thornfield explained, is that you often develop communication styles that prioritize efficiency over emotional connection. You learn to coordinate and manage rather than truly communicate. Catherine recognized this pattern immediately. So much of their daily conversations centered around logistics. Who would pick up which child, what their schedules looked like, what public engagements required coordination. They had become excellent at managing their shared responsibilities, but terrible at sharing their inner lives. During their third session, Dr. Thornfield introduced an exercise that initially made both of them uncomfortable, but proved surprisingly powerful. She asked them to spend 10 minutes looking directly into each other's eyes without speaking, just observing and being present with each other. This feels ridiculous, William whispered after about 2 minutes. Shoo, Dr. Thornfield said gently. Just breathe and stay present. As the minutes passed, Catherine found herself really seeing William in a way she hadn't in years. She noticed the lines around his eyes that had deepened since his father became king, the way he still got a small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident, the flecks of gold in his blue eyes that she had fallen in love with during their university days. More importantly, she began to see past his careful composure to the uncertainty and vulnerability underneath. This was still the young man who had been nervous about introducing her to his grandmother, who had worried about whether he would ever be a good enough king, who had sometimes called her late at night just to hear her voice when the weight of his future responsibilities felt overwhelming. For William, the exercise was equally revelatory. Looking into Catherine's eyes without the distraction of conversation or activity, He could see not just the composed and gracious woman she had become, but the adventurous girl who had challenged him intellectually at St. Andrews, who had brought out his sense of humor, who had made him feel normal and special at the same time. When the 10 minutes ended, they both felt emotionally raw but somehow more connected than they had in months. "What did you notice?" Dr. Thornfield asked. "I remembered why I fell in love with her," William said quietly, not taking his eyes off Catherine. "Not just why I should love her or why it makes sense to love her, but why my heart actually chose her. And I saw that he's still in there," Catherine added. "The person I fell in love with. He's been buried under all the responsibilities and pressures, but he's still there." The breakthrough felt significant, but Dr. Thornfield cautioned them against expecting linear progress. "Rebuilding intimacy is like physical rehabilitation after an injury," she explained. "You'll have good days and setbacks, moments of connection and periods of frustration. The key is to keep showing up for each other and for the process." Over the following weeks, they began to settle into new rhythms. They instituted a weekly date night that couldn't be canceled for work obligations, even if it just meant having dinner together after the children were asleep with phones put away. They started sharing more personal thoughts and feelings during their daily check-ins, moving beyond logistics to include emotions and experiences. Most importantly, they began to approach their physical relationship differently. Instead of expecting instant passion or forcing intimacy, they focused on small moments of connection, holding hands while watching television, brief embraces when passing each other in the kitchen, sitting close together rather than at opposite ends of the sofa. "It's like we're dating again," Catherine told her sister Pippa during one of their regular phone calls. "But dating someone I've been married to for 11 years. It's strange and wonderful and terrifying all at the same time." "Are you happy?" Pippa asked directly, in the way that only siblings can. Catherine thought about the question seriously before answering. "I'm hopeful," she said finally, "which is more than I've been in a very long time." The real test came during their first major public engagement since beginning therapy, a state dinner for visiting dignitaries that would require them to perform their roles as the future king and queen while maintaining their newly fragile connection to each other. As Catherine dressed for the evening, choosing a sapphire blue gown that she knew William particularly liked, she felt nervous in a way that reminded her of their early days of dating. Would they be able to maintain their new intimacy in the midst of such a formal, public setting? When William came to escort her downstairs, he paused in the doorway of their bedroom and simply looked at her for a moment before speaking. "You look beautiful," he said, and something in his voice made Catherine turn to face him. "But more than that, you look happy. I had forgotten how radiant you are when you're genuinely happy." It wasn't the automatic compliment of a husband fulfilling his obligations, but the honest observation of a man who was learning to see his wife again. And when he offered his arm to escort her to the dinner, Catherine took it not because protocol required it, but because she wanted to. As they walked together through the state rooms of the palace, greeting guests and fulfilling their ceremonial duties, Catherine felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the sense that she and William were truly together, working as partners rather than simply appearing as one. When the evening's formal requirements were finished, and they were finally alone in their private quarters, William turned to Catherine with an expression of wonder. "We did that together," he said. "Really together. I felt like we were a team tonight instead of just two people playing the same part." Catherine smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine served at dinner and everything to do with the growing connection between them. "We're getting there," she agreed. "We're actually getting there." For the first time in years, both of them went to sleep feeling genuinely hopeful about their future together. The work wasn't finished, might never be completely finished, but they were building something real and meaningful from the foundation of what they had once shared, and the possibility of who they might become together. 6 months had passed since that transformative evening in Dr. Thornfield's office, and Catherine found herself standing in the gardens of Amer Hall, their private country residence in Norfolk, watching William play cricket with their 3 children on the expansive lawn. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the carefully maintained grounds, creating a peaceful scene that felt worlds away from the formal constraints of their London life. Prince George, now 10 years old and growing more confident by the day, was attempting to bowl to his father with the kind of determination that reminded Catherine powerfully of William's own competitive nature. Princess Charlotte, 8 and fearless, insisted on batting despite the ball being rather large for her small hands. 5-year-old Prince Louis served as an enthusiastic but highly distractible wicketkeeper, more interested in the butterflies dancing around the lavender bushes than in actually catching anything. "Mummy, come play with us," Charlotte called out, spotting Catherine watching from the terrace. "Daddy says you're actually quite good at cricket, though he won't tell us how he knows that." Catherine laughed, remembering the informal games they had played during their university years, often on the beaches near St. Andrews when they wanted to escape the pressures of academic life and royal expectations. Those memories felt both distant and surprisingly immediate, like photographs that had been carefully stored away and were now being rediscovered. "I suppose I could show you children a thing or two," Catherine replied, walking down the stone steps toward the makeshift cricket pitch William had set up on their lawn. As she approached, William caught her eye and smiled with genuine warmth, the kind of smile that had once made her heart skip beats and was beginning to have that effect again. The therapy sessions had continued throughout the spring and early summer, becoming less frequent as Catherine and William developed better communication tools and rebuilt their emotional intimacy. Dr. Thornfield had been right about the process being similar to physical rehabilitation. There had been setbacks and frustrations alongside the breakthroughs and moments of rediscovered connection. One particularly difficult session in April had forced them to confront the ways they had both contributed to the deterioration of their relationship. Catherine had to acknowledge that her tendency to withdraw when hurt, rather than expressing her needs directly, had left William guessing about her feelings and often getting things wrong. William had to face the reality that his conflict avoidance and tendency to prioritize external obligations over internal relationship work had made Catherine feel unimportant and taken for granted. But there had also been beautiful moments of reconnection that reminded them why they had fallen in love in the first place. A surprise weekend trip to Scotland that William had arranged for Catherine's birthday, returning to some of the places they had explored together as students. An evening when they had stayed up until nearly dawn talking about their dreams for their children's futures and their own hopes for how the monarchy might evolve under their eventual leadership. Most significantly, they had begun to rebuild their physical intimacy gradually and naturally, without pressure or expectations. They had started with simple touches, hand-holding that felt genuine rather than performative, brief kisses that lingered a moment longer than mere politeness required, embraces that communicated affection rather than just greeting or goodbye. The breakthrough had come one evening in late May when they had been working together in William's study, reviewing materials for an upcoming tour of Canada. Catherine had been sitting on the floor, spreading documents across the carpet to get a better overview of their itinerary, when she had looked up to find William watching her with an expression she recognized from their early days together. "What?" she had asked, suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. "You get this little line right here when you're concentrating," William had said, reaching down to trace a barely visible crease between her eyebrows. "I had forgotten about it. I used to love watching you study because of that little line." The touch had been gentle and completely focused on her, not on their roles or responsibilities, but on her specifically as a person he found interesting and attractive. For the first time in years, Catherine had felt truly seen by her husband rather than simply acknowledged by her partner in royal duties. Now, watching their children scramble around the cricket pitch, while William patiently explained the finer points of bowling technique to Prince George, Catherine felt a deep sense of gratitude for the work they had done to find their way back to each other. It hadn't been easy, and there were still moments when they fell back into old patterns of distance and assumption. But they had developed tools for recognizing those moments and addressing them before they could re-establish the walls that had once seemed insurmountable. "Your turn to bat, Mummy," Prince Louis announced, presenting her with the cricket bat with all the ceremony of a medieval squire offering a sword to his knight. "Daddy says you used to beat him sometimes, but I think he's just being polite." Catherine accepted the bat with appropriate solemnity. "Well, we shall have to see about that, won't we?" For the next hour, they played with the kind of uninhibited joy that Catherine realized had been missing from their family life for far too long. When had they stopped playing together? When had family time become so structured and scheduled that spontaneous fun felt unusual rather than natural? As the game continued, Catherine found herself appreciating not just the activity itself, but the way William interacted with their children. He was patient with Louis's short attention span, encouraging with Charlotte's fierce competitiveness, and appropriately challenging with George's growing need to test himself against adult expectations. Most importantly, he was present, not checking his phone, not mentally reviewing his schedule, not partially distracted by the weight of his responsibilities. I think Mummy might actually be better at this than Daddy, Charlotte observed with the brutal honesty of childhood as Catherine successfully hit William's bowling for the third consecutive time. Your mother has many hidden talents, William replied, attempting to maintain his dignity despite being soundly defeated by his wife's superior cricket skills. I'm still discovering some of them, even after all these years. The comment was light and playful, meant for the children's entertainment, but Catherine heard the deeper truth in it. They were indeed still discovering things about each other, rediscovering aspects of their personalities that had been buried under years of routine and responsibility. As the sun began to set, and the evening air grew cooler, they gathered their makeshift cricket equipment and headed back toward the house. The children raced ahead, eager for the promised reward of hot chocolate and television time before bed, leaving Catherine and William to walk together at a more leisurely pace. This was lovely, Catherine said, slipping her hand into William's as they strolled across the lawn. When was the last time we did something like this? Just played together as a family without any agenda or schedule. William considered the question. I honestly can't remember. Which is rather sad, isn't it? We've been so focused on making sure the children have happy childhoods that we forgot to actually enjoy our time with them. Well, we can't change the past, Catherine replied pragmatically. But we can make sure we do better going forward. It was a philosophy they had both embraced as they worked to rebuild their marriage, acknowledging their mistakes and missed opportunities without becoming paralyzed by regret, focusing instead on creating better patterns for the future. As they reached the terrace, William paused and turned to face Catherine. In the golden light of the setting sun, with their children's laughter echoing from inside the house, she looked radiant in a way that had nothing to do with her careful styling or appropriate wardrobe choices, and everything to do with genuine happiness and contentment. Kate, he said, using the informal name that had become more frequent again as their intimacy deepened. I need to tell you something. Catherine felt a flutter of anxiety. Over the past months, I need to tell you something, had sometimes preceded difficult conversations about lingering frustrations or unmet needs. But William's expression was soft rather than troubled, and his hand in hers was steady and warm. I'm in love with you again, he said simply. Not just committed to you or fond of you or grateful for you, though I am all of those things, but actually genuinely in love with you. With who you are now, not just who you were when we were young. The words hit Catherine with unexpected force. She had hoped for this, worked toward it, but hadn't quite believed it would actually happen. They had been rebuilding affection and compatibility, but she hadn't dared to dream that they might recapture the profound romantic love that had once made everything else seem secondary. I love you too, she replied, her voice thick with emotion. I thought that was lost forever. I thought we might be able to create a good partnership, but I didn't think we could ever get back to being lovers in the truest sense. We're different people than we were at university, William observed. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we can love each other better now because we understand more about what real love requires. They stood there on the terrace, holding hands, and looking into each other's eyes with the kind of focused attention that had become so rare in their busy lives. Around them, the sounds of their children getting ready for bed provided a gentle soundtrack of domestic contentment. So what now? Catherine asked. We've done the hard work of rebuilding our foundation. What do we build on top of it? William smiled, and Catherine was struck again by how much younger he looked when he was genuinely happy. Now we get to fall in love with each other over and over again for the rest of our lives. We get to discover who we become as we grow older together. We get to be partners in the fullest sense, not just in raising our children or fulfilling our royal duties, but in creating a life that makes us both genuinely excited to wake up next to each other every morning. It was perhaps the most romantic thing he had said to her in years, made even more meaningful by the journey they had taken to reach this point. These weren't the easy promises of young lovers who hadn't yet been tested by real challenges, but the considered commitments of mature adults who had nearly lost each other and fought their way back to genuine connection. As if summoned by some parental instinct, Prince Louis appeared at the French doors leading to the terrace. Mummy, Daddy, are you coming in for stories? George says he's too old for bedtime stories now, but I told him that's ridiculous because everyone likes stories. Catherine and William laughed, breaking the romantic spell, but not the deeper connection they had just acknowledged. We'll be right there, darling, Catherine called to their youngest son. Some things never change, William observed as they headed toward the house. No matter how much we grow or evolve as a couple, We'll always be parents first when the children need us. And that's as it should be, Catherine agreed. But now I feel like we're parenting from a place of strength rather than just getting through each day. As they settled into their evening routine, supervising teeth brushing, reading bedtime stories, tucking each child into bed with kisses, and brief conversations about the day's highlights, Catherine marveled at how different this familiar pattern felt when she and William were truly connected rather than simply coordinating their responsibilities. Later that evening, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into peaceful quiet, Catherine and William found themselves back in their drawing room where they had had that crucial conversation 6 months earlier. But everything about the atmosphere was different now. Instead of sitting in separate chairs with careful distance between them, they shared the sofa, Catherine's feet tucked under William's leg in a gesture of casual intimacy that spoke to their renewed comfort with each other. I keep thinking about something Dr. Thornfield said during one of our early sessions, Catherine mused as she absently played with William's fingers. About how the goal isn't to recapture what we had before, but to create something new that honors what we've learned about ourselves and each other. Do you think we've done that? William asked. Created something new? Catherine considered the question seriously. I think we're in the process of it. The couple we are now isn't the same as the couple we were at 25, but I like us better now in many ways. We're more honest with each other, more intentional about our connection, more aware of what we need to do to maintain our relationship alongside all our other responsibilities. And we've learned that marriage isn't something you achieve and then maintain, William added. It's something you actively create and recreate every day. They talked until late into the evening, sharing thoughts and feelings with the kind of openness that had once felt risky, but now felt natural and necessary. As they finally made their way upstairs to their bedroom, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary journey they had taken together over the past months. They had come so close to losing each other, to settling for a marriage that met their obligations, but not their hearts. But somehow, they had found the courage to acknowledge their problems and the commitment to do the hard work of rebuilding their connection from the ground up. As they lay in bed that night, William's arm around Catherine as she rested her head on his chest, both of them felt a deep sense of gratitude and possibility. They had not just saved their marriage. They had transformed it into something stronger and more authentic than it had ever been before. Sweet dreams, my love, William whispered as Catherine drifted toward sleep. Sweet dreams, she replied, the endearment feeling both familiar and wonderfully new. For the first time in years, both of them fell asleep feeling truly fortunate to be exactly where they were, with exactly the person lying beside them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight they were simply Catherine and William, a husband and wife who had found their way back to each other and were excited to discover what the future might hold for them together. 1 year later, Catherine stood before the mirror in her dressing room at Buckingham Palace, adjusting the stunning emerald necklace that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. Tonight marked the 10th anniversary of the Queen's passing, and she and William would be hosting a memorial service followed by a state reception for world leaders and dignitaries. It was exactly the kind of high-pressure, highly scrutinized event that had once filled Catherine with dread about maintaining perfect appearances while her marriage crumbled privately. But today felt entirely different. As she put the finishing touches on her makeup, Catherine felt calm and genuinely excited about the evening ahead. Not because she was looking forward to the formal protocol and diplomatic small talk, but because she knew that William would be beside her as her true partner, and that knowledge made even the most challenging royal obligations feel manageable. The past year had been transformative for their relationship in ways that neither of them had quite anticipated. The work they had begun in therapy had continued, but it had evolved from crisis intervention to genuine growth and exploration of who they were becoming as individuals and as a couple. They had learned not just to communicate better, but to dream together about their future and the kind of legacy they wanted to create both personally and professionally. 3 months earlier, they had made a decision that would have seemed impossible during the dark days of their near separation. Catherine was pregnant again. The pregnancy had been planned, discussed, and eagerly anticipated by both of them, a conscious choice to expand their family from a place of strength and joy rather than obligation or accident. At 12 weeks along, Catherine was just beginning to show slightly, though the pregnancy remained their private secret for now. They planned to announce it publicly after the memorial service, wanting to give this evening's focus entirely to honoring Queen Elizabeth's memory before sharing their happy news with the world. William knocked softly on her dressing room door before entering, already dressed in his formal military uniform with the various medals and decorations that marked his service and royal status. But Catherine barely noticed the formal regalia because her attention was caught, as it always was now, by the way his eyes lit up when he saw her. "You look absolutely magnificent," he said, crossing the room to stand behind her at the mirror. His hands settled on her shoulders, and their eyes met in the reflection. "Granny would have loved seeing you wear her emeralds." "I hope so," Catherine replied, leaning back slightly against his solid presence. "I still sometimes feel like I'm playing dress-up when I wear her jewelry. Like I'm not quite worthy of carrying on her legacy." "You're not playing dress-up," William said firmly, his hands moving to encircle her waist gently, mindful of their growing secret. "You're honoring her memory by being exactly who you are, gracious, dedicated, genuine, and absolutely perfect for this role and for me." It was the kind of reassurance that William had learned to offer naturally over the past year, having discovered through therapy and practice that Catherine needed specific, personal affirmation rather than general compliments. In the early days of their marriage, he might have simply said, "You look lovely," and considered his husband's duties fulfilled. Now he understood that meaningful support required attention to Catherine's specific insecurities and strengths. "Are you nervous about tonight?" Catherine asked, turning in his arms to face him directly. The question itself represented the kind of emotional check-in that had become natural for them, but would have been rare in their earlier years together. "A little," William admitted honestly. "Not about the ceremony itself, but about the weight of it all. Tonight marks a decade since Granny died, but it also feels like a kind of debut for us as the next generation of senior royals. Papa is established as king now, but tonight feels like the world is really looking at us and evaluating whether we're ready for what's coming." Catherine nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. King Charles III had settled into his role beautifully over the past year, but everyone knew that the future of the monarchy ultimately rested with William and Catherine and their ability to modernize the institution while respecting its traditions. "We're ready," Catherine said with quiet confidence. "We're not the same people who got married 10 years ago and thought we could figure everything out as we went along. We've been tested by real challenges, and we've learned to work together through them." William smiled, remembering their therapy sessions where Dr. Thornfield had helped them recognize that their marital struggles had actually given them valuable skills for handling pressure and maintaining partnership under difficult circumstances. The same communication tools and commitment to honesty that had rebuilt their personal relationship had also made them more effective as a professional team. "Plus," Catherine added with a mischievous smile, "we have some rather wonderful news to sustain us through whatever challenges lie ahead." William's hand moved instinctively to her still flat stomach, his face lighting up with the same wonder that appeared every time they acknowledged the new life growing inside her. "I still can't quite believe it," he admitted. "After everything we went through, after we almost lost each other, now we get to welcome another baby from a place of such happiness and certainty." The pregnancy had been emotional for both of them in unexpected ways. During her first 3 pregnancies, Catherine had been focused primarily on the logistics and health concerns of carrying future heirs to the throne. This time, she found herself simply marveling at the miracle of creating new life with a partner she was deeply in love with rather than just married to. A soft knock interrupted their private moment. "Your Royal Highnesses," came the voice of William's private secretary through the door. "The car is ready when you are." 2 minutes, William called back, then turned his attention back to Catherine. "Ready to face the world, my love? With you?" "I'm ready for anything," Catherine replied, and meant it completely. As they made their way through the corridors of Buckingham Palace toward the waiting car, Catherine found herself reflecting on how different this felt from similar formal events in the past. Previously, she had often felt like she was performing a role that didn't quite fit, trying to meet external expectations while struggling with private doubts about her marriage and her place in the royal family. Tonight, she felt like herself, not just the Duchess of Cambridge playing her part, but Catherine the woman, Catherine the wife, Catherine the mother, Catherine the future queen who genuinely loved her husband and felt excited about their shared future. The formal requirements hadn't changed, but her relationship to them had transformed completely. The memorial service at Westminster Abbey was beautiful and moving, filled with music that Queen Elizabeth had loved and readings that captured her dedication to service and family. Catherine and William sat side by side in the front row, their presence together a symbol of continuity and stability for the nation and the Commonwealth. During the Archbishop of Canterbury's homily about Queen Elizabeth's legacy of faithful service, Catherine felt William's hand find hers and squeezed gently. It was a simple gesture, but one that would have been impossible during the dark period of their marriage when even such basic affection felt forced and uncomfortable. Now, the touch felt natural and mutually supportive. They were holding hands not because protocol required it or because photographers expected it, but because they wanted to share this meaningful moment together, to offer each other comfort and strength as they honored William's beloved grandmother. The reception following the service was a diplomatic and social challenge that would have tested any couple, with representatives from dozens of countries, complex protocol requirements, and hours of conversation with world leaders about both ceremonial and substantive matters. But Catherine and William moved through it together with the kind of seamless coordination that comes from genuine partnership. They split up when necessary to cover more ground and reunited frequently.